Okay, today we will be learning about hypothesis, hypothesis formulation, sampling, and type 1, type 2 error. So these are the three small chunks of topic, very easy and fetches you marks very easily. So let's start with hypothesis. What is hypothesis? Basically, it is a statement that you are about to test, whether it's true or false. A tentative testable statement is hypothesis. So there is this person called McGugan. He says, he gives this definition: a testable statement of a potential relationship between two or more variables that is advanced as potential solution to the problem. So you're assuming that this might be the end result. So, and you test it. So it's like an assumption statement that you make, and you will find every other possible sampling, the data, etc., to support this or to reject this. So you make a statement to test it basically. So there are a few characteristics of hypothesis. So hypothesis should be conceptually very clear. So before you make a hypothesis formulation, you do an extensive literature review from journals, previous research. You do literature review for those variables that you have selected, the independent, dependent variable, and all those things. And hypothesis formulation mainly depends on the problem that you state. So hypothesis and problem are connected. Hypothesis dependent on the problem and vice versa also. So hypothesis must be testable. Hypothesis should be related to the existing body of theory and the impact. That means it's just telling you must have done a literature review and you must have some theories to back your hypothesis. That is one thing. Hypothesis should have logical unity and comprehensiveness. So it should make some sense logically. For example, if I tell all intelligent people are wiser, you must have theories or some logical connection between that. It might be wrong, but logically, at least as a statement, it should make some sense. Logically, it should make some sense. Hypothesis should be capable of verification. Are you all able to hear? Is that taking over me? Is that
Namaste? It's not disturbing. You can continue. It's not distracting.
Okay. So hypothesis should be operational. So it's telling the same thing again and again. You have to, it must be testable, it must be logical, it must be very clear, it must be backed with theories and all that. So there are some 5, 6, it must be verifiable. So there are some 5, 6 characteristics. Very easy, you can write it on your own. Then what are the difficulties that you face while you are forming a hypothesis? First is that one person might not, a researcher might not have enough theoretical evidence. Though you would have done extensive literature review, you would have done it on some studies, not necessarily theories. So you cannot, not every time you can back your hypothesis statement with theoretical evidence. Okay. Second thing, sometimes hypothesis is subjected to a bias. I have some personal observations and experiences upon which I take up a topic and I form a hypothesis that is subjected to bias. I might have a lot of theoretical evidence for it, but I am putting my personal things, my personal observations into picture and into a statement. That means it can be subjected to bias. Third difficulty is that, uh, you know, most of the times you want to work in the direction that you have made the hypothesis, but everything is against the hypothesis. That means intrinsically you're demotivated to work towards or against the hypothesis. Your work and data collection.
Andrea, your volume is low.
So, okay, can we just wait for a minute then?
Sure.
Oh, now am I audible? Audible enough?
Not enough.
Not enough.
Earlier you were audible, like now, not now.
No, now it is better than earlier, is what I feel.
Can you please adjust your
On the
volumes and
laptop,
try?
it's absolutely fine actually, but I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe on the mobile.
No, now you're better. Actually, my volume is on full.
Okay. Can I continue?
Yes, now it's fine.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So these are the three difficulties that you come up while forming a hypothesis. So remember that your hypothesis is dependent on the problem that you state, the statement of the problem, the aim that you state. Okay.
Soundarya, can you please recap those three? We'll just lost the continuity.
Okay. Absence of knowledge and theoretical framework, or just lack of theoretical evidences. That's one. Second is you are subjected to put your personal bias. Your hypothesis can be subjected to personal bias. Third thing is you're demotivated, and it can move, all your works can be away from the hypothesis. That will still go back to the first one because you have lack of knowledge or theoretical background. You're doing that. If you are so well equipped with how you need to go about, then you will not deviate from the hypothesis statement. So these are the deviation is the third one basically. So these are the three difficulties. Okay. Further, hypothesis is a very creative task. Okay. Hypothesis must be very catchy and clear and simple, but it is very creative. So Reichenbach, I don't know how to pronounce the name, has made a distinction between the two processes found commonly in any hypothesis formulation task. So there are two things. As a creative task, it has two things. One is the context of discovery, and the other is context of justification. So why did you make the statement? So why did you discover the statement is one, and how are you going to justify the statement? So these are the two aspects of hypothesis formulation: context of discovery, context of justification, according to Reichenbach. Okay. Further, a researcher should consider certain points while formulating a hypothesis. It goes back to the same thing: expected relation or differences between the variables. So not every hypothesis should indicate some difference between the between the variables. However, there should be some relationship that you consider. Either you tell there is no difference, or you tell there is difference between the variables. Okay, which leads us to the two types of hypothesis. So there are two types of hypothesis: are null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. Null hypothesis is simply which states that there is no difference at all. So, or example, there is no difference between intelligence between male and female of age 30 to 40. This is a null hypothesis. Something no difference, does not differ, something which tells it is equal. This is null hypothesis indicated by H0 at as a what like not
Subscript.
Subscript. Thank you. So this is null hypothesis. Okay. Alternate hypothesis has two sub things, sub hypothesis types. That is directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis. Directional hypothesis is where you tell females are more intelligent than males among age 30 to 40. Something that indicates more or less. That is directional. Just stating that there is difference between intelligence between males and females is non-directional. Okay, you're telling more or less. That means you're directing your hypothesis that towards it is more or less. That is directional, but still alternate. Non-directional is you're just stating that there is difference, but you don't know how much difference, whether it's increasing or decreasing. So the two types of hypothesis and two subtypes of alternate. Null hypothesis is H0, no difference at all. Alternate hypothesis is like there is difference. In alternate hypothesis, there are two things. The difference is more or less. That means it's directional. there is just difference, non-directional. Are we clear with this? This is very important to be understood, without which, any other hypothesis testing, type 1, type 2 is all subjected to bad understanding. So yeah, thank you.
Soundarya, just to what you said was every time a null hypothesis is no difference between this and that.
Yes,
It has to start with a no. I mean, there's no difference.
Yeah, no difference or does not differ at all should be a null hypothesis.
Null hypothesis.
And null hypothesis specific. You're very clear about there is no difference at all. For example, variables have equal, equal influence, or the independent or dependent variable have no effect on each other. No effect, no difference. These are something that indicates equality or indicates no difference is null hypothesis. And if there is difference, that is alternate hypothesis. Again, that could be directional, non-directional.
Correct. And non-directional is when you are actually saying female are more than male. Just repeat that part also again.
Okay. When there is more or less, or greater or lesser, something of these terms, then it is directional. Okay. When you just tell there exists a difference between male and females in terms of intelligence, you're just telling there is difference, that is non-directional. You don't know in which direction there is.
Got it.
But there is no difference. I mean, you don't know how much of difference there.
Sure.
Directional will always have more or less.
Got it. Thank you. I got this.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a common statement, a common formula kind of a thing. If we take say A and B as two variables, H0, that is null hypothesis, will be A equal to B. However, H1 or HA is something alternate hypothesis. Just like we have H0 for null, H1 or HA is for alternate hypothesis. That equation will be A is greater or lesser than B. Or it cannot be equal. Either it is greater or lesser. There is difference. But it usually, as a formula for understanding alternate hypothesis, you put a question mark between A question mark B. Because if you're just telling there's a difference, you might not know whether it's greater or lesser until you test it. Even if the greater or lesser, it's still non-directional hypothesis. If the statement says greater or lesser, then you will put the symbol greater or less. Otherwise, you will just put question mark. This is alternate and null hypothesis. Okay, are we clear? Can we move further? Can we move further? Are we clear?
Yes.
Soundarya, wait, I had a
Yeah.
doubt about the question. You said put a question mark. I didn't understand that bit. First one is directional, the other one is non-directional. You just say that there is a difference between the two, right? So to show that, the non-directional one, you put a question mark. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You say H1 is H subscript 1 is equal to question mark.
Yes.
Is that how you show it?
Yes. Correct.
Okay, fine. All right.
Got
it, yeah.
So do you have the question mark towards one of the side which is more dominant or predominant with the results? Say men versus women intelligence scale. So do I put the question mark on the women's side, which I am tending to support that women have more intelligence than men? Or if it the other way, I'll put the question mark on men's side. Is it that way?
It doesn't matter, because
Okay.
you're just telling there's a difference. Question mark is in between. It's neither towards A or B.
Okay.
So
Yes.
question mark B is in center. So what happens, only if you're putting the arrow marks of greater or lesser symbol, is you need to think A greater than B or A lesser than B. So A can be male or female. B, it depends on what values and what variables you assign for A and B. But for non-directional, it is question mark. For directional, you choose greater or lesser.
Okay.
For null, it is equal.
Hey, I have a doubt. In case of directional hypothesis, if says A is greater than B, then won't the null be is equal to or lesser than B?
Null, no,
So in that case, null will
not be lesser or equal. It should be equal.
So, but if we are trying to find out only a greater than as the alternative hypothesis, where will the less than come? Would it not be a null hypothesis, or would there be an other alternative hypothesis in that case?
Could you repeat the question? I'm not clear.
Like in case we are trying to particularly find out that from previous research, we found out that women have higher IQ than men, and we're only trying to find out the higher. So our alternative hypothesis is women have higher IQ than men. So where would it fall if it comes lower IQ than men? Would it be a null hypothesis, or would there be another alternate hypothesis for us to prove?
No. If you have made a null hypothesis, that will be rejected. And you will have only one hypothesis per research that has to be either rejected or accepted. It could be alternate or null. However, if you're proving one greater, then you will not have the necessity to prove the lesser. It is understood that other variable is lesser. For example, in this context, if I gave women have higher intelligence, if you have proved in that direction, if you have worked in that direction, that women have greater thing, then it is understood that you have the other thing. So you don't need another alternate hypothesis at all. One alternate hypothesis is sufficient. That will automatically tell the other variable has lesser, intelligence.
No, but in case we get in case we get the wrong results, I mean, in case we get women have lesser IQ than men, and so our alternative hypothesis
you're rejecting the alternative hypothesis. You can also reject the alternate hypothesis. Not every time you need to reject null hypothesis only. Your alternate hypothesis can also be rejected.
Yeah, so in that case, then we should be accepting the null hypothesis, right? So null should say equal or less, or what would the result?
No. I'll explain
Soundarya,
that.
let
I'll
me
explain that.
1 minute.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
trying
please.
to understand.
Yeah.
When we say equal, we are actually saying no relationship, right?
Yes.
So when we say
No
in other,
difference. There is relationship, but there's no difference.
okay, no difference. Say for example,
yeah.
intelligence against men and women. So when A increases, B increases. That is directional, I believe. In other case, no relationship. Where what my understanding is correctly, when A increases, I do not know at this time. There is a relationship. I do not know whether this B increases or decreases. I do not know. That is no relationship. So even though we say
I
less
think
than, greater
here
than,
it is not about relation. It is the difference.
Yeah.
Can I
Yes.
explain?
Yeah.
okay,
Go ahead.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, see, for H0, we always go with the theory that the sample mean is same as the global mean or the population mean, which means it's a accepted truth, as Praveen keeps saying the quote to quote, right? Accepted truth. So in this particular case of IQ or whatever, we haven't done the study yet, so we don't know if it's up or down. So we cannot say a null hypothesis a starting point as men are bigger or women are bigger. So we had to say that they are equal. So your null is going to be that they are not having significant difference in IQ levels. That will be your null hypothesis.
That's a very good point. Significant difference is what we need to look than just difference. So null hypothesis indicates that the difference have statistically significant, and acceptance of null hypothesis indicates that the differences are due to chance. So it all depends on your sample selection, your sampling, the data collection. Everything is subjected to a lot of parameters. However, significant, say if you're conducting an experiment of say 60 out of 30 male, 30 female, then 1 or 2 might have increased, one female might have higher IQ, one male might have very low IQ, something like that. But as a whole, does it, as a whole from your selection of sample, do you have a significant difference? Majority of them are not showing difference. That is null hypothesis. If majority of them are showing difference, are they showing in the right direction? I mean, are they showing, if the women are showing in the low direction or men are showing in the high direction or whatever, that will be directional. And if your hypothesis just says there is a difference, then it is non-directional. Am I clear? So significant difference is what we are looking and not just difference. statistically significant difference. It should be proved. You must back up your, even if you're accepting or rejecting your null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, it must be statistically significant difference and proven.
Yeah, I understand
So
that.
I think I'll try to answer you. Who was it? Archana, right?
Prahash.
Yes, your null hypothesis is not going to be a starting point where you say that women have greater IQ than men, and then you accept the other hypothesis, the alternate, as lesser or equal. It won't happen that way. You have to select your null hypothesis as there is no significant difference between the two.
Yeah, so I'm saying in case you take a directional hypothesis as your alternative research hypothesis, saying
Okay.
men will have higher IQ than women, but you get significant difference as women having higher IQ than men. In that case, what do you do? Because your null just says that there is no difference, and your research
Yes.
hypothesis is that men have higher IQ than women, but you got the opposite results, and it is significantly
Opposite of what?
significant.
Opposite
Opposite
of
of the
what? Here?
alternate hypothesis, she said.
Yeah.
So you
No,
will
opposite
not,
will be more or less. Opposite is actually there is significant difference between these two. Now, directional and non-directional is little different. Let's say we say about a presence or something. When the full moon comes, let's say dogs howl. Okay, there is no comparison to make here. There's a presence or absence. This kind of cases, there is no comparative study we are doing, right? So we don't have a directional hypothesis as an alternative one. We'll have a presence or absence of
Tanvi, you will
something of the
have
sort.
only one hypothesis, be it null or alternate, directional or non-directional, you will have only one hypothesis that should be either rejected. So if it is rejected or accepted, if rejected, the opposite will be your answer. That will be your conclusion. But your result will be you have rejected your hypothesis because that was your assumption for your study. It's just an assumption. You have rejected your assumption. Your assumption went wrong, or you have accepted your assumption. Assumption was right. So you will have only one. The alternate hypothesis is not in literal terms. You are, if hypothesis is rejected, you are taking or stating an alternate hypothesis. It is understood that if this is null hypothesis is rejected, there is difference. That means it is automatically telling alternate hypothesis can be suggested, But your original hypothesis was null, you're rejecting it. But if your original hypothesis was alternate, that means you're accepting. That means there's no necessity for a null hypothesis. So you will have only one hypothesis that should be either rejected or accepted.
Yeah, I understood that.
Yeah,
so I'm just asking, where would it?
Huh?
Can I
Okay, I
add
guess we
one
can
more small
continue.
point?
Yeah.
Maybe after
Yeah.
class also. Sorry.
Okay,
Sorry for
yeah,
pulling this
actually-
long.
Okay, so can I speak?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're absolutely right, but I want to add a few more points into it, which are practically done. Theoretically, we do not define any hypothesis in between the process.
Yeah.
The first step is a research design in which we, this is basically, I think somebody had asked this question about directional and non-directional. So it's basically addressing her point of view. So when we do the research design, we define research hypothesis statements in the initial part. We don't go on saying this that my null hypothesis is proven wrong, so now I'll go into another statement. It is less, so I'll go to the higher statement and I'll try to prove the alternate wrong. We define each eventuality as a hypothesis statement and a corresponding null alternate statement to that. So when we are designing the entire research, at that time, we define a simple problem statement which is positive in nature as a null hypothesis. We try to prove whether it is correct or not. If it is correct, then it is proven fine and H0 is valid. If it is not proven, then H1 is proven as valid automatically. But the other alternatives are already defined in the form of research hypothesis statements. We don't do changes later. So this is what I wanted to just add.
Yeah, true. So you will start with one, you will keep that for the entire, you will not bring any other statements in between.
Yeah, and any changes that we are envisaging, this we have to cater in the research design phase itself.
Yeah, you have to stick to what you originally decided.
Yes.
Okay. which leads to another topic called errors in hypothesis testing. Hypothesis testing is a procedure that you do to check if how you're testing your hypothesis, how you're going about, or the results of the data collection, interpretation, everything with respect to hypothesis. Is it going properly, or are there errors? So errors in hypothesis testing. Now, why does this errors occur is sampling procedure adopted faulty. So if you have sampling techniques and procedures, or the way you have conducted your experiment, that is not right. Data collection method inaccurate. So how you have collected data, the environment that you have collected, the moods, or all these are not right. Study design selected as faulty. As Vikram said, you might have been selected a different hypothesis. Your assumption might be wrong, which problem statement and hypothesis statement are very important, because your entire research depends on those two statements. So if that is wrong, which is the first step of your entire research design, that means you're going wrong in the first step. So research design, study design, research design, the methods that you adopt, all these might be wrong. Inappropriate statistical methods. Conclusions wrong. So basically, you can go wrong in every single step that you do. So any fault in every single step leads to errors in hypothesis testing. That's all. So if you go to the steps of research that Seema said, so at every stage, if there is a faulty, that leads to errors in hypothesis testing. Now, going further, there are two kinds of error. Very easy to remember: type 1 error, type 2 error. Type 1 error, this is very important. This statement, if you remember, or if you find something how you remember, then you will understand the whole thing. Type 1 error is you reject the null hypothesis, which is true. Rejection of true null hypothesis is type 1 error. Type 2 error is acceptance of false null hypothesis. So you accept a null hypothesis which is false. Now this might lead to a lot of argument and other stuff. Type 1 error is called false positive. Type 2 error is called false negative. I think that's right.
Can you repeat it one more time, Soundarya?
Yeah. Type 1 error, first is rejection. Okay, rejection of a true null hypothesis.
Yeah, got it.
H0, which is true, is type 1. Type 2 is acceptance of false null hypothesis. Okay, this can be your error. Everything can be done only at the end, because hypothesis testing after you draw conclusions, it's almost the end step. It's just out of curiosity or to test how accurate is your study. Okay, so this is type 1 and type 2 error.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. Okay, there is this boy and girl. So the null hypothesis is the girl likes the boy. Okay, this null hypothesis remains same for both type 1 and type 2 error. So this boy approaches the girl, but the null hypothesis still, the girl likes the boy. I'm not, please don't take, there is no difference. This is just an example I'm giving you. I just found it very attractive and was very impressed by this example. That's why I'm giving you this.
Give a proper one. What is the null hypothesis?
Null hypothesis is
I will state it. That girl's behavior towards this particular boy is not significantly different from rest of the boy.
I don't know. I can't take that. That ruins my example. Okay, let's go ahead. You reframe according to the statistical terms later. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, another example that can be given is, let's say, eating a lot of food outside leads to cancer. Let's say this is the statement. So null hypothesis is that eating junk food will make no difference. Basically, you are saying that even if you eat junk food, you will not get cancer. That is the null hypothesis. What is alternate hypothesis in this statement? Alternate hypothesis is eating junk food will cause cancer. Okay, so what type 1 error means? It is false positive. So what false positive is? So basically you are actually proving it as, you are actually saying that, okay, yeah, this eating junk food will cause cancer. So that is what you are actually,
One
saying.
second, Praveen. Don't call it false positive because it's still not sunk in. Your null hypothesis is
Rejected.
it's rejected.
The true null hypothesis
True
rejected.
null, yeah. The first one
That
is
is-
rejection type 1. So how would that work? He's rejected.
Okay,
see,
okay.
Whatever. With
going
Praveen's
with
example.
Praveen's
What
example.
was your example?
I come back to that later.
Finish
I'll come
Praveen's
back to that
first.
later. Praveen's taking with Praveen's example. See, type 1 error is a major mistake. Type 2 error is relatively a very, very low mistake. Very, very low error. Type 1 error is very huge because you're rejecting the true null hypothesis. So you're actually rejecting something which is very important. You're rejecting something true. So that is a major error. Type 2 error is you're accepting a false hypothesis. I mean, that is also error, but that is relatively has less impact. Going with Praveen's example, you're telling that type 1 error will be eating junk food does not cause cancer. I mean, your end result is like you're rejecting the fact that eating junk food will cause cancer.
Can I quickly give an example, like quick, a simple one. So Praveen got, 80% in all the subjects. Okay, 80 marks or 80% marks in all the subjects. This is a null hypothesis. And when he, when the real evaluation is done, so he got 80. I mean, he should be getting 80, but when the correction is done, they have evaluated it wrong and he's actually failed the exam. Okay, so that is a type 1 error. Means he actually gets 80, but then there is an error. So they are rejecting the null hypothesis. Okay, in case it is opposite, then that is type 2 error. So null hypothesis.
This is not a valid research scenario.
No.
How will it
Can we,
be very
I'm very
Praveen's
confused
example.
now. Can we just stick with
Okay.
Praveen's example first and
Yeah.
clear that one before we move on to, then we can
Yeah,
go to
so-
other examples.
So can I
Yeah,
can I
can you tell us
simplify
what type 1
I
error would be?
told? Yeah. So
Yes,
basically, if I take the same example, eating junk food would cause cancer. Okay. So that is the hypothesis. So null hypothesis, which is accepted truth, is eating junk food has no relationship with cancer. Basically, eating junk food would not really cause cancer. Alternate hypothesis, eating junk food would actually cause cancer. That means you are rejecting the null hypothesis that junk food is not related to cancer. You are rejecting it. So alternative, you are proving that junk food causes cancer, right? So we understood what is null and what is alternate in this example, right?
Yeah.
So now, once you do the research, there are two. If you say that you did the research well without any error, there are two possibilities. Possibility one is you have actually successfully proved that eating junk food would be causing the cancer. You successfully proved it, and it is true as well. Let's say your research is correct without any errors. You proved it, and it is the fact that yes, eating junk food would not cause cancer. Okay, now let's say you did research without any error, but what you found out is you don't have sufficient data to prove junk food is going to cause cancer. That means you are accepting the null hypothesis. Here also there is no error in your research, which is a fact that eating junk food has no relation with the cancer, and you are successfully concluding that I don't have a substantiate proof that I can't really prove that eating junk food would cause cancer. So in these two cases, there is no error. So now let's come to the error scenario, right? Error scenario is one. Let's say your null hypothesis is right. That means junk food has not, there is no relationship between junk food and cancer. Okay, that is the truth. But because you have error in your research, you try to prove that you successfully rejected the null hypothesis. You wrote a statement saying that junk food causes cancer, but actual truth is junk food doesn't have any relationship with the cancer. Basically, what you are doing here, null hypothesis, which is actual truth, you rejected it by doing an error research. Your research is faulty, where the null hypothesis was truth, but your research proved that it is not a truth. Okay, understood? So this is type 1 error. Null hypothesis is actual truth, but you did a faulty research, hence you proved that null hypothesis can be rejected. You proved otherwise. Okay, this is type 1 error. So what is type 2 error? Take the reverse case. We are talking about the error scenario, where in actual scenario, null hypothesis is false. That means if you do correct research, null hypothesis can be rejected, right? But you did a faulty research, hence you actually came to a conclusion saying that, oh, I don't have a sufficient proof to actually prove that junk food has relationship with. So basically, truth is null hypothesis is false, but you proved otherwise.
I have a question here, Praveen. So in the second one, type 2 error, you're saying that there is actually a relationship between junk food and cancer. So junk food, it is the truth that junk food causes cancer. But
Correct.
you're saying that you have not found sufficient evidence. That does not mean that you're accepting that there is no relationship. You're just saying I didn't find evidence and you've left it at that. But it's only a type 2 error when you say there is no relationship, right?
Correct.
Then it becomes an error. Saying that I don't have sufficient data, I need more data, that is not an error yet.
That is
right?
That is correct. That is correct.
That's my understanding. Okay.
That is why type 2 errors are not as dangerous as type 1 error.
Yeah.
Okay?
Before that, can we watch a video?
It is still an error.
Okay. Saying that I don't have sufficient data is an error. Not saying that I can carry on my research and find the answer later. Right now, I need more sample data. That is not enough. It's actually an error.
There are two things here you need to actually understand here is, see, you concluded that you don't have sufficient data, but actually you collected data wrong because there is some error that happened. Okay. So here the reason for type 2 error is not about not having sufficient data. You did something wrong, but you are still writing your hypothesis saying that I don't have sufficient data. Okay. So here we are talking about an error scenario. So there is a slight difference. But as you said, right, type 2 error is less dangerous when compared to type 1 error. Okay, in such scenario.
Type 1 error is more dependent on the researcher, and type 2 error is more dependent on the sample and variance. Before that, can we watch a quick 3-minute video which will solve most of our doubts? I have sound sharing also. Let me know if you are not hearing the sound.
Before that, Soundarya can
my example is in the video.
Okay.
That boy girl wala video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a nice one.
In this lesson, we will learn about the errors that can be made in hypothesis testing. In general, we can have two types of errors, type 1 error and type 2 error. Sounds a bit boring, but this will be a fun lecture, I promise. First, we will define the problems, and then we will see some interesting examples. Type 1 error is when you reject a true null hypothesis and is the more serious error. It is also called a false positive. The probability of making this error is alpha, the level of significance. Since you, the researcher, choose the alpha, the responsibility for making this error lies solely on you. Type 2 error is when you accept a false null hypothesis. The probability of making this error is denoted by beta. Beta depends mainly on sample size and population variance. So if your topic is difficult to test due to hard sampling or has high variability, it is more likely to make this type of error. As you can imagine, if the dataset is hard to test, it is not your fault, so type 2 error is considered a smaller problem. We should also mention that the probability of rejecting a false null hypothesis is equal to 1 minus beta. This is the researcher's goal, to reject a false null hypothesis. Therefore, 1 minus beta is called the power of the test. Generally, researchers increase the power of a test by increasing the sample size. This is a common table statisticians use to summarize the types of errors. Now, let's see an example that I heard from my professor back when I was studying statistics in university. You are in love with this girl from the other class, but are unsure if she likes you. There are two errors you can make. First, if she likes you back and you don't invite her out, you are making the type 1 error. The null hypothesis in this situation is, she likes you back. It turns out that she really did like you back. Unfortunately, you did not invite her out because after testing the situation, you wrongly thought the null hypothesis was false. In other words, you rejected a true null hypothesis and lost your chance. It is a very serious problem because you could have been made for each other, but you didn't even try. Now, imagine another situation. She doesn't like you back, but you go and invite her out. The null hypothesis is still, she likes you back, but this time it is false. In reality, she doesn't really like you back, that is. However, after testing, you accept the null hypothesis and wrongly go and invite her out. She tells you that she has a boyfriend that is much older, smarter, and better at statistics than you and turns her back. You made a type 2 error, accepted a false null hypothesis. However, it is no big deal as you go back to your normal life without her and soon forget about this awkward situation. Hypothesis testing is usually like that. You don't really want to make any of the two errors, but it happens sometimes. You should be aware that statistics is very useful, but not perfect. Alright, that's all from our love/life/statistics lesson. Thanks for watching.
For more videos like this one,
No, everyone is confused now.
Understand?
Ritu is really confused.
So
That was
thumb
cute,
rule
right?
is very
I
simple.
think it was very cute. I think the only part that was confusing, like Prash is saying, is that 1 minus beta and alpha. The rest of it
That's
was
not that
very
important. It's
cool.
not in our thing.
Okay, great.
Alpha is the probability of making a type 1 error. Alpha, type 1 error, beta, type 2 error. The probability of making type 1 error is alpha.
And how do you calculate probability? Is it based on the sample
I
size?
really don't know. No,
Okay, it's not in our
That-
notes. So
yeah, it's not in our notes. How you calculate?
Don't ask
alpha.
out of syllabus questions, Ray. Already it's so
okay, okay. Sure, sure.
Okay, and second thing, you said
One quick
Alpha and
answer to
beta.
that.
I know one thing.
One quick answer to that. How do you test or find out the probability of anything? You do an experiment so many number of times. How many times the experiment goes through by total number of attempts is your probability.
Yeah, that makes sense. Correct.
Also,
So generally,
for
the
example,
p-value
dice
is
roll a
calculated.
dice.
Generally, these alpha and beta is derived from the p-values. So when we actually talk about test of significance,
yeah,
we will
that's
go
what I
into
was
those
about to tell.
p-values and all those stuff.
Okay,
So
okay.
that
the
is where-
relation.
That
Go
is
ahead,
where
go
we go and test this particular hypothesis for type 1 errors and type 2 errors kind of a thing.
So the probability of alpha and beta is your significance level. Type 1 error, say example, you said 0.5 significance level, then your probability of doing that 0.5 type 1 error is 0.5%. Alpha is equal to 0.5. So your significance level that you set is your alpha. for type 1 error. The significance levels that you set for type 2 error is your beta. Simple as that. The relationship between type 1 and type 2 error is this. Usually what people do, they set very low stringent levels of significance, say 0.001. So your probability of making type 1 error is that low. That means inversely, your probability of making type 2 error is high. So you have so much percent of making type 2 error. So if one is low, if alpha is low, beta is high. Alpha and beta are inversely proportional. That is the relationship between type 1 and type 2 error. Usually type 1 error significance is set less because it has major impact, because it is you who are making a mistake. Type 2 significance, that is beta, level of significance is usually does not impact much. So the level of significance that you set there does not impact your research much.
Can I ask one more question? So
Yeah,
Narendra, you said that the type 2 error is dependent on the, the video said that it's dependent on the variance and the sample size. Did it say
Population variance, sample size.
Okay, I understood how it depends on the sample size because of Praveen's example where you say you don't have enough evidence or data to prove it as prove your hypothesis. But I didn't understand how it depends on variance. Do you just explain that?
Praveen has to answer.
No, what is the question? So basically,
the question
she's asking
type 2 error is depends
on sample size and population variance. She understood how it depends on sample size, but she did not understand how type 2 errors depends on population variance.
What is population variance? Population variance
variation in the population.
Exactly. So let's say
like
if you have
gender
a lot of
and age and ethnicity, all that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. That's right. So let's say your population has got lot of variance, lot of different functionality, different personalities, right? So what would happen if you have so much of variance in your population?
I thought it helps your experiment to have more variance, right? You get a
not necessarily all time.
Not necessarily. So basically, what would happen? You are taking sample size from various populations. So what would happen is you are
diluted.
Let's say you want to prove something, okay, which is dependent on culture. Let's say, okay, I'll give you an easy example. Let's say you want to prove that haunted house causes anxiety, and in your in your population. Yeah, in your population, there are so many varieties of people, and in some cultures, let's say there is nothing related to hauntedness or devil. So what would happen? Ultimately, when you take various people from various backgrounds, your research would not conclude anything.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, correct.
So when you have lot of variance, then you will have an inconclusive research because your hypothesis has to be so much. You will have to regulate your hypothesis to consider all those particular variants. So you might have to actually define hypothesis saying that so and so background of a culture hauntedness would cause anxiety, kind of a thing. Then only you can probably reach to some conclusion. Otherwise, you might not really prove anything out of that research.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So high population variance and the high and low sample size, right? Those are the two things.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I want.
Yeah, the haunted house thing. If you are giving the survey to some ghost people, they'll simply say, "I love the place."
Okay.
And Praveen should not be taking that example. Bad person to give that example. Okay. Moving further, what is the importance of hypothesis testing? Hypothesis formulation. Giving a hypothesis makes your research more focused. It keeps you motivated. It helps you work in that direction. That is the main importance of hypothesis formulation according to Good and Hatt. Good and Hatt. So formulation of hypothesis links between theory and investigation, which lead to discovery of addition to knowledge. So yeah, it gives you the base work and links between the theory and investigation. That's your link between the actual theory that you have done the literature review and the investigation that you're about to or are doing. So that is the importance. We are done with hypothesis and type 1, type 2 error. I hope we all are clear. Okay. I'm moving forward. Sampling. There are quite a few terminologies we need to know. What is a population? Population is also called universe. So population is a group of people, a whole larger group of people which meets your criteria. Say married couples are a population. What is a sample? The smaller representative of a larger whole is a sample. A sample is like a fraction, a part of a whole. Okay, a sample is like a fraction. So people that you choose from the whole population becomes a sample. Now, what is a sample size? The number of people that you choose from the population, the number, sample size is the number. Next, we have sampling frame. Sampling frame is the list from which you choose the sample. Sampling frame must have a ordered or a cataloged list. Say, a telephone book, yellow pages, your Facebook friend list. All these are lists, sample frames. So from which you select the sample. So a list of the population that you choose to select the sample, or list of samples that you have, from which you again use some technique and select the sample. That is the sampling frame. And then you have sampling technique. So in sampling techniques, you have various techniques and how basically which technique or method you use to select the sample. Even see, for example, your population consists of say 5,000. Then you are bound to choose more sample of at least say 500 or 1,000, which is still a huge number. You might not be able to conduct your questionnaire or survey on all that 500. Your time might be less or anything. So you will use some technique so that the sample that you select represents the other people. So there are many techniques that we use, which leads us to two types of sampling methods: the non-probability sampling and the probability sampling. Non-probability sampling just means that not every sample in your population gets an equal opportunity to be a part of the study or research. On the other hand, probability sampling is every sample has the equal chance or opportunity of being your sample. However, they might not be a sample, but they definitely have an equal chance. Here, it's subjected to a lot of bias. So why do we use these sampling techniques or methods? Is to save time, save cost, time and cost. These are the main two reasons why we use sampling techniques and methods.
Could you repeat it one more time, Soundarya? The two techniques or the two sampling methods? Just repeat it one more time.
These two have multiple sub things: non-probability sampling method and probability sampling method. Non-probability, the name suggests, all your samples may not get equal chance of being a part of the study or research. Non-probability. The probability of every sample is being a part of research is very, very less. It might, partiality, the word partiality, you can remember, the partiality. So probability sampling on the other side is everyone has an equal chance. You cannot fight that, see, you chose her or you didn't choose me. So you cannot like that. You can, the chance of every sample being a part of the study is equal. The chance is equal, the chance is unequal.
Okay, I got it. Like Madhu was asking in the chat also, could you give an example?
Okay, there are many.
Just to add there, right? Chances are equal does not mean that they will get selected.
Yes, correct.
There is a chance that they will, equal chance that any one of them can get selected.
Yes.
That's what it means, right?
Correct, very true. Okay, now let's go with non-probability sampling methods. Those have at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types. Okay, first is convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is also called accidental sampling, haphazard sampling. Convenience, haphazard, accidental. This just means out of your own convenience, you're selecting a sample. For example, college students is your population. I am a student from JNC. So I just go I sit near the gate. So if I see anyone, and I am doing some study on the arts students. So if I just ask if that student is art or not, they tell, okay, yes, I'm willing to be a participant. I give my questionnaire, they fill and give back. So that is convenience. Out of my convenience, I am selecting the sample just because they came their way and they accepted my, to be a part of the study. I am conducting my study on them just out of convenience. Okay. Now next we have quota sampling. Now quota sampling also, it is similar to convenience. What happens here? You introduce one more parameter to shortlist a group of people. Say, I'm still conducting my study on arts students from college. I will tell, I will conduct it only on girls who are of 19 years. Usually degrees, colleges are from 18 to 21, 22. So that age group. So I will conduct only on 19 years. So I am introducing one more parameter. I'm introducing a quota of it should be a girl and she should be of 19 years. If I ask those two questions, I'm still using, after that, I'm still using convenience sampling. So she came, I asked her, she accepted, I still give. That I'm still using convenience, but I'm introducing one quota for it. That is quota sampling.
You added two, no, Soundarya? One is girl and 19.
Yeah, you can add 2 or 3. No.
Oh, it should not be only one. It can
be
more than one
2
factor.
or 3, but it should, as a whole, it should support your study. Not, okay. If I tell, see, it should, the parameter is 19 years. It could still be, I could just introduce 19 years and not girl. I could just introduce girl and not 19 years. Or I choose.
Okay, got it.
It can be 1 or 2 or, more, but the quota is usually 1. But if it is, as a whole, if it is supporting your study, I think 2 or 3 is still fine. I'm not sure about that. Thank you. I'll get back.
Yeah, you can have multiple.
For convenient, maybe for convenient, you can say any girl who comes, I'll take the first, 10 girls or something. And for that, for the next quota, you say, okay, now it has to be a 19-year-old girl. Maybe something like that.
Something like that. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Convenience doesn't care about it. Whoever comes, let them come. I don't
Convenience
care.
is mostly towards
It's
the
like,
population
I
and
don't-
not sample.
Yeah, I don't select my sample. Let whoever comes. I'll randomly send email. Whoever responds, they respond to the survey. That is convenient.
Whoever writes the exam will pass the exam.
Yeah. See, most of the research that we did in bachelor's degree were convenience sampling.
All examples are related to exams now for Ritu.
Okay. Moving on. The third type is.
Only exams and marks now.
We are running out of time. Okay, moving on, we have purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is mostly used in field research or explorative research. That means your judgment of, say, any person of the population is what matters. That means you purposively select a sample. Say, for example, I think this girl who is passing might be an art student, and if she happens to be an art student, but this purposive sampling has to be in a larger population, it has to have a larger sample. So all these non-probability convenience and quota can be for smaller samples, say 60, 100. But purposive sampling is something that you do in a field research or explorative. You want to just explore or make up a theory or something like that. You will use purposive sampling then. It is very confusing. These non-probability sampling techniques are very confusing because everything looks like convenience sampling. But purposive sampling is used in field research and explorative research. And the researcher's personal opinion and judgment is what matters. You think that she or he might be a good sample out of a whole lot. Your judgment is what matters. You purposively select the sample. So that is purposive sampling.
And here you don't put parameters like the has to be 19, has to be girl. There are no parameters set for that.
Yeah, the parameters that you choose are very less, or there are hardly very few parameters. For studying attitude toward any national issue, a sample of journalists, teachers, legislators may be taken as an example of purposive sampling because they can more reasonably be expected to represent the correct attitude than other class of people residing in country. So you think that, the lawmakers, the teachers are, the persons in these profession have a better opinion over some national issue. So your judgment or your evaluation of these professional people is what matters. So you think your evaluation on them is a good thing. That's why you choose them as sample. So a national issue should be concerning everyone. So you might police cops. So if you consider police cops, that's they might be biased. If you consider teenagers, they might be biased.
One more significant example which might explain you quota sampling better is, let's say you are trying to study a population, okay, and you found out that there are actually 40...
You're doing quota or purpose? What is that? Purposive.
Yeah, I'm first telling the quota and then we can probably go into purposive.
Okay.
So in case of quota, what happens is, see, let's say you have a population, okay, and you're trying to study this particular population, and in that population, you know that 40% are males and 60% are females, let's say, right? So now when you're trying to take the sample, what you are actually reserving is, okay, I'm going to take 100 people out of this entire population. In that, I'll make sure that 40 are male and 60 are female. Basically, you're reserving a quota to male population, reserving a quota for female population, and you're sampling it. Right? Yeah. You use some logic, but you're fixing the quotas and then taking it. But there is one more sampling technique that would come in probability. I'll explain the difference between these two, but you can see that it is almost like you are reserving some, it's like a reservation where you are actually, fixing certain quotas and you are actually taking samples based on those quotas that you are actually trying to reserve it. That is quota sampling. Okay. So purposive sampling. So underline the word purposive. So you are trying to actually do some research. Okay. And let's say you are trying to, for example, you are trying to do a research where you used a method of collecting the responses using online survey. Okay. So basically somebody will have to open their smartphone or laptop and fill your survey to answer your questions. So now here what you require, yes, you have a lot of population, lot of variety of people, but you want people who are easily, who can easily manage their laptop. You don't want to select people who can't really, manage the laptop. It is not because you don't want to include that sample. It is just that, okay, for your method of research, you are just trying to actually see, I will select the age category who are convenient, or age or education category who are convenient in using laptop, because my method of doing the research is by collecting the response over by using laptop. So you are actually selecting the sample based on the purpose that you are actually trying to achieve here, right? So here it might not be entirely that you are selecting a 19 years old or 20 years old. You are not fixing any quota. You are rather choosing based on the purpose of your research. That is purposive.
Am I good to go? Still have a lot in sampling techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next is snowball technique. Snowball sampling is, if you remember, I had explained this when we were doing some questions. It's just a snowball technique is used for a population that is very rare. Rare population, you use snowball techniques. For example, children with ADHD or something, you're trying to do some research on them. So you will find parents, or you will find one or two respondents or contacts that whom you know can be a part of the study. Then you will ask those parents if they know other children. They will mostly know other parents or other children from their contact. So it's just like from one parent, they tell network marketing, so from one you get to the other, from there you get to the, it's like this chain reaction. Snowball thing is also called network or chain referral or reputation sampling. So it's just like why they give snowball is as the ball rolls, you collect more snow. So when you contact every other contact, from that person of contact, you have many other contacts that you get. So it's like, that is why it's called snowball sampling. So it's used only for rare, not only for, it is mostly used for rare populations. That is snowball. Next is systematic sampling. Now this sampling technique is very tricky because it can fall under both probability and non-probability sampling. Systematic sampling is it can be a best way to remember this is chit pick or selecting in a class of 100 you're selecting every 4th or every 9th person. So you're following one system to select your sample. This might look like a probability sampling because out every 9th person is your sample. So 9, 18, etc., etc., etc. However, the other people, the 1 to 8, might not be, will lose an equal opportunity of being your sample. They are losing the opportunity of being your sample. Though the every 9th person is selected, the other 8 of every 9 set are losing an opportunity of being your sample. They are not equally getting the same opportunity. So it's not like a chit pick method or something that you put every 100 and you just keep on picking chits. That means every 100 has the same probability of getting a chit picked. But here only the 9th person is having that chance of being your sample. So that's why they have put it at under non-probability sampling. So who knows, the person who is 4th or 5th or 6th or 8th might fulfill your sampling criteria much better than the 9th person. But just because this person is in the 9th position or 9th roll number, 9, 18 roll numbers, this person is being a sample. So this is a sampling technique which can be considered both probability and non-probability, but they are put under non-probability because they feel that 8 of them are still not getting the equal chance. So that is,
what is the name of this method again? This systematic.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so 5 in non-probability: convenience, quota, purposive, snowball, and systematic. Again, convenience, quota, purposive, snowball, systematic. Non-probability, done. Now going to probability. What is probability? Your chance, every sample has an equal chance of being your sample for the study. In probability, there are three. Okay. First is simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is the chit pick method. Very easy to remember, chit pick method. So every person, say all the 100, simple random is also used for small population. Let's say 40 or 60. So everyone's roll number is written in same color paper, same size paper, and folded and put in a box. So some blindfolded people are just in random, some person comes and picks. So all the 40 or 60 people in that class have equal opportunity of being a sample, because the person is not a Trikalajnani or something who knows, okay, this chit I pick has number 2 or 3. No, it's not like that. So every person has that equal opportunity. Again, here you have 2 ways. This can be done in 2 ways. One is sampling with replacement, sampling without replacement. Now when I tell sampling with replacement, that I'm telling, if I pick one chit and open, I see the number, I put the chit back again. So that is sampling with replacement. I'm replacing that one sample that I took again. However, I've noted the number that the first chit that I picked was 4, but I'm replacing it again so that every person has equal opportunity. So say if there are 40 people, I have 40 chits, and the first number I took was 4, the probability of every person being as your sample is 1:40. If that is sampling with replacement, if I put the chit back. Suppose if I take the chit back and keep it out, then the probability of every sample being your, every person being your sample is 1:39, because I've taken out that one chit. That is sampling without replacement. So these are the two things that you have to consider while doing simple random sampling. This is very simple, random. It's still random, but gives the equal opportunity, equal chance of every person being your sample. So that is with simple random technique. The advantages of simple random technique is each person has equal chance as any other being selected in a sample. Simple random sampling serves as foundation against which other methods are sometimes evaluated. It is most suitable where population is relatively small, where sampling frame is complete and up to date. However, what you need for simple random technique to be executed is complete up-to-date catalog universe is necessary. That means in a class of 100 or 40, all 40 numbers should be listed. They must be, the information about them must be cataloged, easily listed and noted. You must have noted the information prior. So that is one drawback. Otherwise of which you cannot execute. And if there are too many samples available, or if your population is very large, then also you can't execute simple random technique. But the advantage is it's like this convenient sampling used in quota and purposive sampling. Just like that, simple random sampling frames the foundation of other probability techniques. So you in further as we go to other sampling probability sampling, you'll understand. You introduce something, but still after that introduction and after that filtration, you will still use simple random sampling. So it is a foundation of other probability samplings. Are we clear with simple random thing? It's very easy, chit pick method.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
And it has two subcategories. You said replacement and without replacement, right?
Yes.
Okay,
with replacement, you put the chit back. Without replacement, you keep the chit outside.
Okay.
Okay. Next is stratified random sampling. Now, the first one is simple random sampling. This one is stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling is when your population is mid-sized or little large, not huge, very large, little large. Okay. Now, what you do, for example, you are conducting a study of creativity on school students, CBSE school students. So, school students is a huge population. There, you will make them into stratas of ICSE, CBSE, state syllabus. So you're making them, strata means group. So you're making them into group, and then you apply simple random techniques. That's why it's called stratified random sampling. So you make them into stratas first. Say, even under stratas, say you're selecting 50 from CBSE, 50 from ICSE, 50 from state. And then you're applying simple random sampling. So it's called stratified random sampling.
Is that not like a sampling frame? Somewhere it's like the frame, something similar to that, right?
Sampling frame is the number.
Sampling frame, you said, is like
list.
Yellow pages. Yes, it's like that. You've put them into like taking from a particular.
Yeah, yellow pages still has all the people in that particular state or country or district or whatever. Those people. But on what basis are you
Okay, here it's like strata is a division of the frame.
Division, yes.
You break the frame down into smaller pieces. That's
yes.
Got it. Okay.
And you are not randomly breaking, rather you are putting some criteria and breaking. You might say that I have a strata which is group 1, which is consists of let's say male population, group 2 female population, and then I will take randomly from male and I'll take randomly from female and then make a sample.
Yeah, and there are two things that you need to consider here. stratified sampling is done for homogeneous population. For example, students is a lot, but homogeneous population. And when you make stratas, the stratas must be non-overlapping. ICSE students never overlap with CBSE or state students, and vice versa. Any other board syllabus students will never overlap with these people, because the school is different, the management is different, the teaching method is different, the syllabus is different, etc., etc., etc. So they don't overlap, but they're all students. They are studying the same standard, say 5th standard. They're all students of 5th standard of Karnataka, but that is still, you know, a larger thing to consider a homogeneous population, but you're introducing a non-overlapping stratas and then apply simple random technique. So that is the second method, stratified random sampling. Now the third thing, sorry, did I just tell heterogeneous or homogeneous?
You said homogeneous.
I am sorry. This is heterogeneous, because there are no. I must clear it when I
homogeneous within strata, heterogeneous across. So that's how
No,
it is.
now I'm confused. You said it's
Okay.
a homogeneous sample. That means they're all the same age and they're all the same class and the same state.
it is-
So that
no,
made it homogeneous, right?
Keep that term apart. So
Yeah.
basically what she is saying is, so when you are actually trying to select the group, okay,
They
you
must
are
be
not going
non-overlapping.
to- yeah, you don't have a person who is like overlapping. For example, let's say you're making a 2 groups, people who smoke and people who don't smoke. There is nothing in between, right?
Yes.
So you are able to distinguish a person, either he is a smoker or he is not a smoker. But let's say in certain cases, if you are trying to actually deal with, let's say you are trying to group people who live in Karnataka, and the second group is people who speak Telugu. Let's say you are making this type of
Yeah.
grouping. What would happen? There might be some
Overlap, yeah.
people who live in Karnataka and still speak Telugu. Then how, whether they belong
Yeah.
to group 1 or group 2?
Got
Then
it.
stratified sampling cannot really come into picture. That is exactly what
So
it means.
forget homogeneous. Just forget that term right now. Basically,
Yeah,
what
keep
you're
that
saying.
term aside.
Yeah.
Basically, you are able to distinguish which
So the
group that they
stratified,
belong
the
to.
the stratas or whatever, the separations have to be non-overlapping.
Non-overlapping. Yes,
That's
correct.
the only
Exactly.
criteria.
Mutually
yes.
exclusive.
Yeah, mutually exclusive. Yeah.
Yes.
Exclusive.
Yes,
Yeah.
independent.
Yeah. got it.
Further, next sampling is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is where you, it's also called multi-stage sampling. So this sampling you use when you have a huge population, like very huge population. Say you want to conduct a study on 3rd standard students across the nation. So first what you do, you break them into, you know, of course, 3rd standard students, you break them into districts, states. Okay. So from states, you make there, it's like cluster has stratas plus simple random. So it's called multi-stage sampling. You break them into small clusters. So every time you break down or narrow down, your cluster would get smaller. I mean, from huge, so say 3rd standard students is a very huge thing. Then you have many clusters of 29 states. Among those 29 states, in each cluster, you pick some few districts, say metropolitan districts, some rural districts. So from those districts, that is a subcluster. So from those subclusters, you're again taking ICSE or CBSE or something. So you're breaking down your sampling into, you're narrowing down by introducing one criteria in every step. So you're clustering at every step and you're introducing stratas and simple random. Simple randoms technique you introduce only at the last step. So before that, you're clustering based on one criteria. You introduce one element, based on that, you narrow it down. So there you break down your entire population into many small clusters who are still your potential representative of the population. So every kid is still getting in.
I got it. So you can or cannot use stratified in this situation, the stratified sampling. You can or can. It's not like you have to.
Yes.
It is a necessity that it is added after cluster. It's not needed.
Yeah, but in certain cases, right? in certain cases, such sampling would actually choose. For example, in the same example what Sandhar has given, right? So let's say you are trying to, let's say research is about, you want to find out what is an average intelligence level of a third standard student. Let's say you are trying to do this research. So let's say how you are going to sample it. So now your research is about third standard students, and our country is really huge. So you can't really ask students to travel from, let's say, somewhere in Bihar, and some people from Mumbai, some people from here, etc., etc. You can't really pick one student from various places. What you will actually do, you have multiple districts in the entire India, so you want to randomize. So let's say you conduct an intelligence test in one of the districts in Bihar. All third standard students in Bihar village would write that particular test. Similarly, you go and somewhere in Maharashtra, you go to a particular district. All third standard students in that particular Maharashtra would write it. And you go somewhere in Kashmir, take a small district there. All students there would actually write a intelligence test. So then you would assume that this is like you took sampling from various places, but actually what you are doing, you are dividing entire India into small groups, each group, let's say one district, and you are randomly selecting the groups. So instead of collecting from all districts, you are randomly selecting the district that you want to actually read, and multiple districts, and you are mixing it as your sample.
Okay, so this is the cluster. It's neither stratified nor a simple random. It's totally different. You're just taking a group, a cluster. You're not
exactly here. Group division is not really like strata. Basically, in case of strata, you are actually defining the way that you are grouping. Here, rather, you are just dividing randomly into groups. You are saying this is group 1, this is group 2, this is group 3, and I'm going to select out of 10 groups. I'm going to randomly select 2 groups. You're still randomly selecting groups, but your grouping is done in a different way, not exactly the way strata works.
Okay, understood. Yeah, thanks for that.
Cluster is multi-stage sampling. So basically, simple random techniques for a smaller population. Stratified random sampling is for a medium-sized population. Cluster is for a large population.
Okay.
It's an easy way to remember.
Okay.
Okay. Now that comes to the end of today's topic, with the last thing being importance of sampling. I just read out. In research, sampling method has obtained great importance. Sampling studies are becoming more and more popular in all types of studies. Okay. The vastness of population, the difficulties of contacting people, high refusal rate, difficulties of ascertaining the universe make the sampling best alternative in case of social studies. It's just telling not everyone is ready to be a sample. So following these techniques will, help you get over all those problems. The census method is rarely, if ever, tried in matters of social research. I didn't understand this. Okay. Recent developments in sampling technique have made this method more reliable and valid. The results of sampling have retained as sufficiently high standard of accuracy. So the main aim of sampling, using a sampling technique, is it is cost effective. Cost is very lowest. Data collection is faster. And since the data set is smaller, it is possible to ensure homogeneity and to improve the accuracy and quality of the data. So because, sample is a representative of a whole population, your data set, your data collection, the time you use, and the quality of the data that you get is more and accurate. So that's why we use sampling methods. You also, just like you have research design, you have sampling design also. So, a detailed, extensive research also has sampling design. So in sampling design, first you list your population, then it's just like introducing criteria and selecting the numbers. The numbers and the criteria that you introduce, the numbers you select and the criteria you introduce, how, where, when is what is sampling design. Just like research design, you have sampling design also. So that's about.
So I have one question, Sandhya. You said the probability one is used for small, medium, and large size populations, and for those, I'm guessing you would, because it seems to be like it would be used for a more serious study, and the non-probability are more casual studies, is what I understand. Is that correct? Why would you use non-probability? Is my question. Why would we use it? Don't we want more accurate results?
Not every time, see, of course, even if you're very accurate, there will be some errors that you do in your research. That is one thing. However, there are some researches that is just done out of curiosity and not very seriously. So there, non-probability sampling, for example, that can, research done with non-probability sampling can be a strong foundation or a motivation or some stepping stone for a greater detailed research. So the people encourage, psychologists and researchers encourage using non-probability sampling to even get the interest into the research.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Most of the college students or university students, undergraduates, use non-probability sampling only. They are suggested to use non-probability sampling than sampling. Probability sampling is more technical.
Also, it sounds.
Yeah.
Can I add one example here?
Yeah,
so, like in non-probability, right? One of those samplings is snowball. So what happens is, let's say in case of AIDS or any other, sex workers, those people that they want to interview, they're not readily available. So that you get through contacts, right? And there you can't have a population and then we can select randomly, right? There it is specific group of people who are not readily available or readily agreeing to participate, right? So in those, that's where the non-probability type of sampling and that application, I mean that kind of sampling is used.
Yeah, and mostly
it's hard to find people of openly who would come out openly to participate.
Yeah, also
then I guess that's how the snowballing technique would apply, right? That she said.
Yes, exactly. So that's what I right. So in that kind of one, it is
snowballing. Again, for example, if your hypothesis or research method is like research question is like, can the performance in running fast is it equal among all sorts of weight groups? For that, you can just pick entire class and ask them to run, right? So there again, you don't have to select your sample very, very carefully. So basically, it depends on the research topic and your hypothesis.
Research topic also, and mostly non-probability sampling is done on a lesser sample size, a small sample size, say 60, 80. That is the maximum.
And other one is like, again purposive also.
Yes, sorry. IGNOU says 60 is a sample for our second year project. I think 60 is a sample size.
Yeah, good enough. So most probably we will end up using convenience sampling or purposive sampling. Most probably, we are most likely to use those.
We will end up using convenience sampling because if we actually do a survey, I don't think we have a choice. We'll ask our friends, please fill that survey.
Oh, we can do those online surveys, no? What do you do?
Yeah, that is still convenience. Also. That is still convenience.
Only. Oh,
online sampling, online survey as well. Who all you are going to reach? You are going to reach the people
random
who
people
think that would respond to you, right?
So it's a mix of purposive and convenience.
Yeah. Exactly. You will reach out to people whom you think might answer, right?
So we have a good platform. See, we have 200 people in our group, so anybody can create a SurveyMonkey link and send it in the group. So we should be.
And how many people do you expect to answer?
It's more like this sample chooses you rather than you choosing the sample. It's like they select whether they want to answer your questionnaire or not. It's almost like that. It's not like you can select your sample size.
Not really. Not really. They just have to be willing. For example, I'll tell you the loop. Oh, this is not the right platform. You stop the recording now, I'll tell.